Hello everyone, it's Lauren again. This video title is called Navigating Homework Challenges and Tests for Students on the Autism Spectrum. And this is something that I have learned myself through being diagnosed on the autism spectrum a long time ago. And with my experiences on it and what I experienced, I do feel like that students on the autism spectrum and teachers need to understand this. I grew up in a time period where autism was poorly understood, and I carried the diagnosis of it, even though when I was originally diagnosed, it was called pervasive developmental disorder, even though autism was listed under that category of disorders at the time. I still always considered it autistic. In this video, I'm going to share as much as possible my academic challenges that I faced my whole life from kindergarten all the way through college. And I feel like that teachers of all levels of students, from kindergarten and preschool all the way up through post-grad school, need to have an understanding of how the autistic mind works, because each person learns differently and it affects people differently. Some people experience certain struggles worse than others. And autistic individuals are very talented, but we just have to give them the chance. If we learn how their brain works and try to work with them, then you as teachers and parents will see a significant improvement in your child. And if given the right supports, I'm a firm believer that they can be equally successful as their peers in anything they choose to do in life. When I was in first grade, we started working on the more challenging assignments, and I don't remember having tests in first grade except for spelling test. And it was around that time that I noticed that I suffered from a math learning disability. And because of my math learning disability, I often got really frustrated on math homework assignments to the point where I would just cry and just felt down on myself for it. And my mom even had to help me with my math a lot. She even bought me math workbooks to improve my math skills, and it helped some. When I was in second grade, I started developing the extreme frustration when working on math assignments. And every time that I got frustrated from that time on, if I had trouble with the assignment or felt as if I couldn't master it, I started gnawing on pencils. And also, I think it was when we started taking tests for sure that we had to study for in second grade, more than just spelling test every week. I started feeling test anxiety, and that resulted in meltdowns. And even if I studied the material ahead of time, sometimes I would oftentimes fail the test. And in third grade, I had an aide with me for about 6 months, from September through like the end of March, right before Easter. And having an aide in the classroom was a huge blessing for me. My aide, she helped me to get my assignments done, and she was very patient with me. She also liked the other kids in my class, and they loved her. And it felt like I showed significant improvements in everything when I had the aide with me in the classroom in 3rd grade. And a couple of times when I was in 3rd grade, I made what they call the honor roll status. Back then, that's what they called it if you made good grades. And I still struggled with my meltdowns on assignments and on tests with my aide there, but it didn't feel like it was quite as bad. And when I prepared ahead of time for anything that we were going to do in class, like a test or something else, it helped with the aide there, but it didn't take everything away. And when I was in 4th grade, for some reason or another, I was not able to have an aide that year. And I believe that if I would have had the aide continuously, I would have continually improved. And when I was in 4th grade, everything started back again. I started slipping through the cracks again. My grades slipped again because it was really hard. And I can't blame my parents because they did everything that they could for me. And I started receiving services more intensely 4th grade than what I had before. And I was put on homeschool for a month in November of my 4th grade year. I didn't do very good. I didn't feel motivated at that time when I did homeschool. And near the end of the school year, almost 6 months later, right around the middle to the end of April of 1991, we got a new aide. And it wasn't traditional homeschooling. Like, we would go to school for part of the day on certain days of the week, and I would be homeschooled for the rest of the day at home. And that was better than traditional homeschooling because I was still able to see the other kids in my class. I didn't want to be away from the other kids in my class because I liked them. I had the same aide in 5th grade, and we had classes in a different room of the school, and I went to school and left an hour different than the rest of my class, and I had the same lunch, same recess, and same gym time as the kids in the rest of my class did. And I still continue to have difficulty with taking tests and doing homework, and I would get really anxious if I felt like something changed and still not on stuff, and started wringing my hands when I got frustrated. My new aide slash teacher was very good. I did get behind in math. And when I got to 7th grade, my mom and dad were still advocating and still actively involved in services with me. And everyone felt like I needed to be put in special ed classes to be caught up with my peers. And what I learned from that was that I should have kept up with what I did in 3rd grade, having an aide in the room with me to help me when needed with my homework. And in 7th grade and 8th grade, I had to be placed in all special ed classes with a couple regular ed classes at certain times of the day. In 8th grade, I was gradually weaned back into regular classes. In 7th grade and 8th grade, my severe test anxiety and frustration over homework assignments continued. And not only that, but I was also one of those kids that felt like I had to be the best of the best at everything. And that really affected everything. In 8th grade, the first class that I was mainstreamed back into was 8th grade history class. And I was weaned into that class in the middle of September of 1994. I worked really hard in that class, and several times our instructor would have us reading the chapter in our textbooks, and my interpretation of reading the chapter in a textbook is me reading a whole chapter word for word instead of just skimming through the important parts of it. My dad, he always asked me, well, how was school? And I said something that I didn't do very good on a history assignment that we were having, and we had to read the chapter the night before, and he was like, well, did you read the chapter? And I didn't get through the complete chapter because I thought we were supposed to read it word for word, and I did what I could, and so I said, no, I didn't. And then another time in that very history class, actually several times, I can remember studying ahead of time for all the tests that we would take in that class. And there's been times where I would study really hard and the material was totally different from the study guide, and it really confused me, and it caused me to have a meltdown the times that I did it. And whenever I would have those meltdowns, it would often result in me failing the test, and therefore that brought my grade down in history significantly lower than what I had hoped it would be. In addition to me being in a regular education history class, in November, right before Thanksgiving, I mainstreamed into English class. I did fine in my English class. And then finally, near the end of the school year, I finally asked to be mainstreamed into a regular 8th grade science class, and I did just fine in that one. And from that point on, I was in all regular education classes except for math class. Back in those days, teachers had to follow a certain curriculum, and if you were in special ed, you would follow the special ed curriculum in middle school and high school. Even if you were good at one subject, you couldn't just be placed in an honors class in one subject and be in special ed in another subject. You had to be in honors classes for all the subjects and tests for it. There's a lot of lessons that I've learned over the years as me being an autistic, and it has not been without its struggles. What I feel like should have been done is if teachers can learn how each student learns and work with them individually at times if needed, versus having them in all special ed classes if they're struggling in any way on the autism spectrum, or like if they got straight A's and have them in all honors classes. And I strongly believe, had I not gotten behind in 5th and 6th grade, that I could have been in a regular education math class, which is tutoring as needed. Unfortunately, my academic issues still continued in high school, and what really affected my academic issues was when I got put on a lot of medicine at the end of my freshman year. I didn't feel good, my grades slipped, and there was this one class that I surprisingly had an A in the whole year, and it went from an A to a high C because of my just not being able to function because I was on so much medicine and we were trying to work things out. And for the last 2 weeks of school, I was taken out of school for the year. But luckily, I was able to get all my assignments turned in on time, and it didn't affect that part. I continued to struggle with tests in high school. My sophomore year, I had an A in my science class, and we had to take a final. And at the final, it said that I failed it. And it wasn't because I didn't study. It was because the material in it was different from the study guide. As teachers, I feel like it's your job to ensure that each of your students has the best education possible. And just because they struggle, that doesn't mean that they're going to make bad choices. If you have autistic students in your class that are high functioning, or with any other neurodivergent needs like dyslexia or dyscalculia or attention deficit, I think it's important to modify certain stuff to help them to learn it better. Maybe give them an idea of what to study for in advance in order to help them. My academic issues did continue in college and cosmetology school, and there was so much that I just didn't know going to college the first time that I wish I would have known now. And still, even back then in 1999, there still was little known about autism, and I was always told that if you can't go to college, then you can't go and you shouldn't go. Well, that's not true. And when I went to college, I didn't do very good my first year. Didn't want to give up. Got a D on my speech class because I had a lot of problems with my professor. And I also got a incomplete on my developmental math class at first level, and that was really hard. And it wasn't that I didn't try hard, I just so struggled and I didn't know what to do. And for me, when I got tired and stressed out, I just couldn't do it, and I needed breaks more, and I had to work harder than normal students that do well in college because of my autism. And then I dropped out of college after my second semester ended of my first year, and I enrolled in beauty school, and I was thinking, oh, that's going to be better. Well, I was wrong. I still struggled academically in beauty school, and I worked very hard at it, and I studied intensely for our written tests that we had to take every so often in beauty school. And unfortunately, I didn't do as good as I'd hoped in beauty school either. So I got a low C in my lab class and a B in my written portion of it. So I ended up transferring schools to a school for students with disabilities, and I did a little bit better there, but I still struggled and had a lot of meltdowns in beauty school because of my grades. And later, when I got my cosmetology license and got my first job, I wasn't happy with the beauty field because I wasn't able to be financially supported, and I always wanted more education than what I got, even though I struggled. So I decided to go back to college, and when I went back to college, I struggled again. I took math classes multiple times, failed every one of them, and when I finally got around to taking college algebra, I took it twice and failed it. And the big problem was, well, the professor did not prepare us for the final exam ahead of time, and I worked and studied and almost never took a break to get that. I also took anatomy and physiology, and I failed that class too and had to drop it, and it was so frustrating and embarrassing. And I believe I had a different teacher for anatomy and physiology, and if the teacher for my college algebra class would have prepared us as much as possible for our test that we had to take in that class, I would have been fine. Until we had the finals in my college algebra class, I actually had an A in the class. When I was taking it at the time, the school that I went to required a passing on the final exam in all of their math classes in order to pass the class, even if you had an A in the class previously. And then whatever passing grade that you got on your final would be put on your final grade for the class. And even though I took tutoring, I felt like things could have been different. And when I failed college algebra, it was so devastating for me that I felt like I would never get through it. I was so determined to earn a college degree that I would have done anything for it. And failing college algebra just made me personally feel like a failure. And in my second time failing college algebra, I earned my associate degree, and at the time I was at a community college, and the community college just said I was ready to just go on and get my bachelor's degree, and they gave me a write-off, but I really didn't need it because luckily at the school I was transferring to, they did not require college algebra, and I'd already had a good enough math credit that I could have gone on. So when I got to my bachelor's, I still struggled academically with my autism, and I could barely pass anything at times. In conclusion, once again, teachers should be willing to help each student achieve their educational and career goals, regardless of what they want to do and regardless of their autism. Instead of feeling ashamed of a person's autism symptoms, figure out how they learn best. That's your job. And BTW, guys, I'm going to say this, but there's even doctors on the spectrum. All right, guys, thank you very much for listening, and I hope that everybody can take this advice about autism and apply it to learning. Thanks. Bye.